I can safely say that I did not expect Disney to allow Marvel to go dive into race and some of the deeper themes of race as much as they have, but here we are. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, ring that bell below. So, the second episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, called The Star-Spangled Man, dives deeper into some racial issues that I just didn't think, I never thought I would be around to see a Marvel show do in my lifetime. So, it opens with Walker sort of pep talking himself into going out to Good Morning America and sort of an interview as taking over the Captain America mantle. There's this whole pomp and circumstance, but the biggest thing about that scene is that he is talking himself through. And just so you guys know, Walker is not super powered or super does not having a super serum in him. He just happens to be at the top of his class and certain skills and whatnot. And he's a white dude, which makes the opening sequence interesting because his best friend comes in as a black man and sort of has to talk him up when you put them side by side and you hear how they talk and how they're which one's ready for the moment. It feels more in line that Lamar is more prepared to be and better suited to be Captain America than Walker. But we know that can't happen. Not in the way that the world typically would accept who could be the embodiment of everything American. And so he's doing his interview, and Bucky's watching and getting increasingly more angry. That stone cold stare face that he has, he's gotten in full force, and so that is what leads him to go meet up with Sam and sort of be like, why the hell did you give up the shield? Like, why did you drop the shield off to them? You knew what was going to happen. You knew this was going to take place. He trusted you with the shield. And he sort of antagonized and act and just beats down Sam a little bit. And Sam doesn't want to hear it. Sam has his reasons for turning it down. We all sort of know it. I think it's more just because he knows that if he put that shield on, he would never be accepted. Like, the world would not accept a black man being Captain America. That's how he thought. And so that's why he gave the shield up and gave it up thinking that they would just use it as a beacon of hope or a beacon of like, this is what this represents, not realizing that they would repurpose it, repackage it, make it white as they could, and give it back out to the world. And that's what they've done. And so he has his reasons. He can't quite say it to Bucky because Bucky sadly is of a world where he would not completely understand it. And they go into their banter. And this episode sort of does what I wanted a little bit get more. And once you put them together, you get it. Just the interactions between the two. They go tit for tat. You can tell that there's a care for each other. That care, that bond is Steve. So that brings them together. But I just love the interaction they have with each other because it's pretty damn funny. Two sides of different coins, just going tit for tat. Sam is less concerned with what's happening with the shield and more concerned with what's happening with the Flag Smashers. So he is on his way to go do that when Bucky sort of tags along, and they end up in a situation where they are going toe to toe with the Flag Smashers and getting their butts handed to them. They realize that they are superpowered. They are all superpower, and so there are at least on that truck about 4 or 5 people that have serum or some have powers and have used the serum of some sorts, but it ends up being about 8, and they're getting their butts handed to them. It is not going their way at all. And so the new Captain America and Lamar, who goes by, I believe, Battlestar is what he calls himself now, which is a code name for another African American comics. They're digging deep for this one. Pops up, and while they also are not superpower, it doesn't go their way either. They all sort of take an L and they get away, and the Flag Smashers get away. And during all of this, the Walker and Sam and Bucky and Battlestar sort of have a conversation and say, "Hey, we could use your help if you want to join us. We can make this happen. We need you." And Sam nor Bucky really want to do that. Sam sort of he's taken aback a little bit by Walker's cavalierness with wearing the Captain America stuff and saying, he's not trying to replace Steve, but then ask him to be sort of his partner or side, in a way, sidekick, and sort of rubs Sam the wrong way, and they end up broken off and going to kind of do their own thing. Which leads to one of the, I think for me, the two big points of this episode, which just hit me hard. One, we get the revelation of Isaiah Bradley, who, for comic fans, is an old school Captain America, the Black Captain America, and it gets into some pretty grimy and dirty areas of Marvel, in the gray areas of Marvel, and the gray areas and dark areas of MCU. Isaiah Bradley is a former war veteran who, unlike Steve, who volunteered to be for the Super Serum program, there are people of African American descent who were just taken and had this serum injected in them, and just to sort of test and see what it did. They were used as the guinea pigs, which was a normal thing back then for African Americans. It happened with the Tuskegee folks with syphilis. They would put this in them to see and test to see what happens, get some of the characteristics, and then see if it's something that they can give to the people that they actually quote unquote care about. And so we get a sequence here where Bucky seems to be the only one who was actually actively aware that Isaiah existed. Steve was never aware. Sam definitely did not know. But Bucky was aware. He even got his ass kicked apparently by him back in the day. But he was aware and kind of was just trying to see if he could give him a lead as to why all these folks with super soldier serum were starting to pop up. And because he only thought they were sort of the last of the two, and Isaiah's not having any of it. Understandably so. It would be incredibly difficult for a man of color who was treated like garbage to get this power. And then once he comes back to the U.S. is arrested. In the comics, it's more for because he was court-martialed for putting on the Captain America uniform. Here, I'm sure it's going to be different reasons. But either way, he was put in prison after doing a service, doing something for the country. But he was put in prison, and then he didn't even get to live his life normally in prison. They were poking and prodding and testing and using him as a guinea pig. It's like, well, you're here. We can do whatever the hell we want to you. It just shows you how little one veterans mean to the world, but also African American veterans. It's a very telling story that doesn't get that's seen so much, and it's played beautifully. We end that sequence, and we tell in that sequence because Sam's pissed. Sam's like, wait, why wasn't I made aware of this? Well, we have a person here, one of color. We just have a black man who we've just discarded, and no one has any freaking reason to tell people this. Like, we don't know this. Sam gets a little agitated, and he's being agitated in public in the middle of the street, and he seems to be being agitated to a white man. So the police roll up, and yeah, it gets grimy. It gets to the point where you're like, yo, this could turn terribly wrong. And anybody who's been in that situation, or anybody who just watches the news, when you see a situation like that, they tell you to calm down, even though they are calm, even though the person, Bucky, is like, yo, he's not bothering me. He's done nothing wrong. We are having a conversation. It starts getting escalated to the point they start calling other cops, start calling other vehicles, and you're like, well, what the hell? And it sucks because the only way that he got out of this without being murdered or being arrested is that they recognize him as being a celebrity. They recognize him as being Falcon. And not even the officer who was about to be gun and trigger happy. It was his partner who was like, whoa, wait a minute. This is one of the good black folks. We can't kill this one. This one's a hero. That's essentially what was said. And it just feels a type of way because it's like, oh, wow, that's accurate. You might get off because they recognize you as a basketball player or a rapper. But if you were just a regular old black person, not so sure Sam would have gotten out of that situation. Okay. And so that's a very powerful scene in a comic book show. It also is funny because the actual person who is in trouble with the law is Bucky, because he has a warrant out for his arrest for missing his court-appointed therapy session. So he gets arrested, gets put in the back of the truck, and Sam has to go sort of check in on him and get him out of there. And that hilarious therapy session that we've seen in some of the trailers happens, but at the gist of it, we learn why Bucky sort of feels bad about the way that Sam has just handed off the shield, because Steve entrusted him with him. He believed in him. He believed in Sam. And if Sam was just willing to discard that, then maybe Steve got it wrong. Maybe Sam didn't pick the wrong person to believe in, and that means maybe that he himself wasn't as valuable or worthy of being believed in if Steve got that wrong. And so he's sort of taking that to heart and saying that you giving that up means that maybe Steve just didn't know what the hell he was talking about. Which is nuts. It's nuts, but also completely understandable. We don't really learn why Sam made the decision that he did, but I think it all comes down to race, and I think eventually Bucky's going to have to see that the reason why Sam didn't is just because of almost being arrested for just standing there. The way that Isaiah was treated, I think he's going to have to start being like, hey, Buck, you can see why it would not have gone well had I put this suit on. And I think that's eventually what we're going to get out of all of this. We also have some confrontation between Walker and the team. They basically say, hey, we got you out of this jail. Come work for us. Come be us. And they're like, no, we operate outside the law because we're not a government agency. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And they're like, cool, stay out of our way. So that the two of them is not going to go in well. But we do get a sort of a little cameo, a tease of what's going to happen next week because they mentioned the name that we've all sort of been waiting for. We knew it was coming. Big villain Zemo sitting up in prison. They're going to have a talk with him. And eventually, just because of the way that we've seen, somehow he's going to end up out of prison. The two big pieces that we know are going to be on the show that we haven't seen, we've heard by name multiple times, is Sharon Carter and Zemo. So at some point, the two of those folks should be showing up on the show. I'd imagine it. Zemo definitely is going to be the next episode. I would imagine they probably have to go through Sharon to get to Zemo. So I'd imagine maybe that's how she pops up. But all in all, this is one of my favorite episodes of either of the two, either WandaVision or Falcon and the Winter Soldier, just because it hits on some very, very poignant points that I don't think many people want to talk about, but I'm glad that it's getting discussed. It may not be perfect, but I think it at least brings up and gets to broach some subjects that I think a lot of people who watch these type of shows would actively choose to ignore, actively choose to keep their head in the sand. So I love that they're using these shows as the vehicle to be like, hey, there's some issues we need to talk about. We're still going to make a comic show. We're still going to put on the action. We're still going to put on this buddy thing. But just for a moment, we want you to take a moment to be empathetic and sort of think. Because you guys all care about Sam. But you also got to remember that Sam is an African-American male. And we need to have some talks about that. It warms my heart. What did you guys think about episode 2 of Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Go ahead and leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast by the same name that's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that plays podcasts. We are there. We are currently doing a buddy film retrospect with Through the Eyes of Falcon and the Winter Soldier with our guest host Jamie Jarrett. We also have a sister podcast called You Can't Do That Anymore, where we talk about classic films like Back to the Future or West Side Story or American Beauty and look at those films when they came out, what they did, and see if they can do some of those things now through the eyes of 2021. But like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.